The Union of Journalists in Finland represents 14,000 Finnish journalists and media workers. And for us, media is not just the cornerstone of democracy, but we believe it's also an important emergency supply element in the Finnish context. Huoltovarmuus in Finnish, familiar word. So we had the opportunity to put together a very interesting panel on an issue that's very actual and interesting for us all meaning disinformation and hybrid threats. And the title of this session is The Role of Quality Media and Journalism in Countering Disinformation and Hybrid Threats. And let me just shortly introduce you our very interesting experts today. So on my left-hand side, we have Aki Mauri Huhtinen, who is a military professor at the Finnish National Defense University in the Department of Leadership and Military Pedagogy, and his areas of expertise include military leadership, command and control, information warfare, the philosophy of science in military organizational research, and the philosophy of war. That was lengthy. Welcome, Aki.
Thank you very much.
Good to have you here. Then we have Nika from the Atlantic Council's DFR Lab. What does DFR stand for?
It's Digital Forensic Research Lab.
Yes, Nika Alexeyeva, sorry. And she's seconded by the NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence. And she is a great expert in disinformation. She has also a background in journalism. She has been writing on business topics and made data-driven stories about energetics, global economic trends, and education. And she's unfortunately very familiar with the Kremlin disinformation narratives. And we'll hopefully hear some more about that today. Then we have Heidi Jern from Google. She leads Google's public policy and government affairs work in Finland and also on key priorities in Northern Europe. And before joining Google in 2016, Heidi worked for the European Commission and European Union for many different positions there. And also she's been working in the EU Secretariat of the Prime Minister's Office in Finland. So welcome, Heidi. And then last but not least, we have Anneli Ahonen, who has a long experience in developing democratic responses to disinformation on an international level. And she's been following very closely the Russia's disinformation around the invasion on Ukraine as an independent expert. And before that, she's been working, among other places, at the East Stratcom task force at the European External Action Service, running the EU's response to Russian disinformation. And also for us Finns, she's also very familiar as a journalist, working for Helsingin Sanomat in St. Petersburg for many years. So this is our brilliant panel for today. The first issue I would like to raise today is trust. We heard trust mentioned many times today. Trust needs to be earned. Trust needs to be earned by actions. And Finland is a special case in the sense that the trust in media is very high. If we look at the Reuters Institute digital report that they make every year, 70% of Finns still trust the media today. But at the same time, we see globally that decline in political systems, decline in journalism, trust in almost anything is going down. And when I was doing my own research, I defended a PhD on patriotic narratives in Russian TV. I saw this really weird statistic on Russia saying that 17% of Russians trust in absolutely nobody when it comes to information available. Like when they make decisions on their everyday matters, they don't trust even in their close friends and relatives. And I think this lack of trust must be one of the reasons that Russia is not doing very well also in the field of war.
Was it 17 or 17?
17% of Russians trust in nobody when it comes to getting information on everyday matters. So, and this is a global phenomena. We saw an Edelman Trust Barometer called the year 2021 the year of information bankruptcy, meaning that our leaders globally are suspected of lies and misinformation, and less people trust even in the quality media. So I would like to start with Nika and Anneli, the first question, because you both have background in journalism, and after that you have become experts in disinformation and misinformation, specializing in Russian affairs. So what should be done to help our societies to be more resilient towards trends like mistrust? So how could we not just recognize better misinformation or disinformation, but also become more able to trust each other in this environment where everything's kind of under suspicion? Nika, maybe you start.
Sure. So, well, first, to address the issue of trust in media, one of the key disinformation targets are actually trust. RT's famous slogan, "Question more." Recent COVID pandemics, when vaccine skeptics and anti-vaxxers, there's this Swedish documentary, probably some of you have seen it. The strategy is to raise questions that are sowing these doubts in security of vaccines, in honest wish of governments to actually, well, make life better. So mistrust is one of the goals of disinformation. The famous story about the crucified Ukrainian boy, the anchors who voiced the story, they said, we don't know if it's true, we've heard the story, but we think you should hear it. And so though they disclosed that they don't know the actual origin and they haven't verified the story, they kind of told this horrific story. And for people who missed the beginning or were not paying attention, it sounded true. Though they kind of did their journalistic work of setting, like, to disclose, setting this disclaimer. At the same time, they sow like this a little bit of mistrust, well, by telling horrifying story with no evidence, which for many Russians then started to basically trigger the skepticism. Maybe there really is some Nazi movements in Ukraine. That's one of the examples how disinformation is poking into little bits that they can exploit, and so mistrust. Maybe I will stop here so we can continue in more kind of discussion format.
Should I follow up? Yeah. So I just to build on what Nika said, I think that like one thing that we have probably underestimated during the course of the past years is this erosive effect and cumulative effect that Russia's disinformation is trying to achieve. And it has clearly achieved that inside Russia, where it has been possible to mobilize the society at large to support the war in Ukraine. But as Nika said, exactly the same aim has been also in this export part of Russia's disinformation campaigns to Europe, to the West, to the US. And now how to tackle this? I'm actually quite hopeful in this regard. I think that a lot has been done during the past years. There is a huge amount of civil society organizations, more and more media, journalists, and governments trying to address disinformation. What is maybe interesting from the point of view and angle of today's discussion on security is the very recent Swedish agency on psychological defense that includes in its tasks addressing and countering foreign influence operations. But actually its background is in Cold War concept of psychological defense that comes very close to the today's discussion on the will to defend the country. So that's how Sweden has started to organize its response to disinformation through countering disinformation into the psychological defense concept. So I mean, I would actually be interested in other panelists' views on this, and in the case of Finland, if that could be some kind of direction to also go forward.
Thank you. Maybe we go very quickly to Google. Heidi, I would think that trust is the core business of big tech companies like Google. But at the same time, you know, if I was like an evil disinformation architect and really good at search engine optimizing, so I would basically go there and try to put out my own narrative saying, you know, Finns are fascists or whatever, and I would try to put it everywhere. So how much effort do you actually put in tackling disinformation narratives at Google?
Thank you. The short answer is a lot and an increasing amount, I would say. But as a tech company, making sure when we run several products and services, and for us to be able to make sure that we deliver on our mission, Google's mission is the very ambitious to organize all the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful to all. I read somewhere that we would achieve this mission in around about 300 years. None of us will know if we ever did that. But core to that is, of course, making sure that we are able to design products and services that deliver high quality results, deliver what users turn to our services for. And in some cases, that can be disinformation. Researchers looking for information on what sort of narratives are around. So there's a innate sort of, there's conflicting goals. And there's the need to really respect the user choice, making sure that especially through Google search, you are able to find the results that are, of course, legal and that relate to the question that you have posed. But disinformation comes in various shapes and forms, and we've learned a lot in the past years through cooperation with a broad range of researchers, and we have, of course, a very big own capacity. We have a threat analysis group, we have a trust and safety team that does this work around the clock. But going back to your first question, I mean, and looking at it from a sort of how to actually design the products in a way that they can actually deliver useful outcomes, we first need to, of course, define what it is we want. And I think in Finland especially, we have a tendency of, I think we would all pretty quickly come to an agreement of what we think is, for example, quality news. That's not necessarily the case in other countries. I mean, the study that you mentioned, I think, found that in the US, there's some 25% who trust in the news. So there, I think you would get a completely different set of answers to the question, well, what is then the quality news that you need as a counterweight to possible news of less quality or even disinformation. And then when you actually go down and look at the product level, you need to be able to define parameters on which you can then make the sort of ranking that is innate to a lot of tech products, including products such as a search engine and YouTube, which is a platform that we own as well. So there's really so many different layers to that work, and it's abundantly clear that it's a job that will never be. We can never kind of sit back and say, well, that was done. But we really need to continue investing in this and making sure that we, as a private company as well, do so in collaboration with independent experts around the world.
Thank you. So Aki, I would like to ask you about this, because you're expert also on these media systems and how these information narratives move inside these rhizomatic systems. The cynical view would be that there's no way for us to kind of like keep the trust and you know, remain the way we used to be, because the world is changing so fastly and there are so many realities that people already exist in. So what do you do inside the defense forces to keep the trust in this society and this system? I mean, the defense forces is like very, very well trusted in Finland. It's actually pretty crazy to look at the democracy where we so love our defense forces so much. So maybe you can also tell how do you do this. But like in the meantime, how do we keep things the way they are?
Actually, the first one is practice and actions. How you're training, how you're using your units, and also try to coordinate what is the message. Because I think what is the good point in Finland, for example, or the Western countries' armed forces, that they have a background, something like a routinized background, how they train when they have a shooting range, when they have a different kind of parade. And it's something like ritual things. People are used to following this machine, and people something like reading the messages. And for example, if we look now the NATO new strategic concept, so it's quite funny because NATO cannot start shooting in the Ukraine or shooting against the Russian. The only war what they can running at the moment is information war, because they build up the deterrence and defense, but only where they're using really the word war is information war, because otherwise still they speak about a little bit Russian like adversary. And this coming also in Finland. And if we look, for example, the strategic concept of NATO, they highlight behavior-centric approach or narrative lead execution. So Stratcom narrative sent the message to the broad audience, not anymore the people who stand with the NATO or stand with the Western values, but more broadly, because 2 of the 3rd world population don't know who is the Zelensky or what's happening in the Ukraine. So NATO try to send the message that they are trustful, you can trust, and it's not only the journalist or public affairs, it's more in the practical level what the armed forces are really doing. And this is a little bit same to us. We have a very good history experience after the Second World War, how we using our military machine. And we have to integrate this message, this unwritten message, how we exercise together with the NATO, and send the message that when we are going this range, the narrative and message is back to the Western values and so on.
That's interesting. So basically the only war NATO is involved in is information war.
If you look how the NATO action at the moment, they cannot send the fighting groups inside of the Ukraine. They absolutely not start the war against the Russian. So what is the action? It's more strategic communication. It's built up the deterrence, defense, and of course, if something happening and there is an Article 5, of course they have to respond. But until this situation continue like this, the only war what you can fight is information war.
Yes, I was just coming to you. So are you actually dealing with the warfare in your work as a civilian?
Well, yes and no, meaning that, of course, we are tracking what information influence operations Russia is carrying out. And for instance, everyone where it was really a matter of time before Russia is launching any information influence campaign, say on social media. And end of August, we detected one. It resulted end of September in takedown of about 20,000 Facebook assets, like accounts, pages, one group, and about 50 Instagram accounts. And they used identity of known mainstream media outlets, the ones that are actually creating and earning trust. So what they did, they copied some articles, they copied source code of some pages that legitimate media outlets have, stored them on their own servers, and used spoof domains. Very clever tactics, because if you end up on this false link, any other link you click on would lead you to the real media outlet. So you read false news, but the ecosystem around it is true. So if you don't know that you were misguided at the very first step, you would think that this is what De Welt, Bild, other known media outlets in Europe would report. And Germany, as you probably noticed from the names I was mentioning, was the target. Besides, it was also France, Italy, Latvia for a little bit. And on Facebook, what they did, they created pages using logo of Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, also named their pages Open Opinion, exploiting the idea of freedom of speech, and posted things that would make people doubt the idea of sanctioning Russia being good. In Germany, in sense of economical terms, like the cut of Russian gas supply. In France, in sense of weapon deliveries to Ukraine. Were they successful? Not really, because the only traction they garnered was from ads that they paid for on Facebook. And even then, it was in terms of a few hundreds, likes, comments, shares. Everything else was just ignored by the general Facebook audience. And also, this campaign was quickly detected. Very poorly organized. About half of the assets, Meta, that is now kind of the new name for the Facebook, they assessed that about half of the assets were taken by their algorithms that detected the inauthenticity of the assets. What this long story teaches us is that it becomes less and less effective to launch cheap information campaign. It becomes cost ineffective because if you are really building out a lot of content there, trying to kind of earn trust to then misguide, chances are that you will be discovered and all your effort will be taken down. So they did not invest much and they were quickly discovered. So the only thing that they managed to do is pay for content with, not very high engagement after all. So it shows us that we made quite a good way already in building resilience on technological terms on information space, but of course there is much more to do.
Thank you. That was an interesting story, and technological resilience, I'm sure, is important. But then, especially here in Finland, we talk a lot about media education, that we are great in media education, and we put a lot of effort in that. But in this new environment where technology is always is developing really fast, and actually, you tackled it really well this time, but they learned something from that. So what are the opportunities for citizens or even us journalists to operate in this environment where this information technologies become more and more sophisticated? What would you say, Anneli? You already said there's hope, but...
There's hope. Well, I think one way to go forward, probably especially in Finland compared to other countries, would be for the media and journalists work more together with people like Nika and other data analysts and do joint projects, or with the sociologists, or with like go a bit beyond the normal journalistic lines as we know them. Because I think that a lot of examples of these kind of investigations often come from joint work between the journalist, media, and then you still need the data skills and data science behind it. So that's developing fast, and I think that Finland might be lacking a little bit behind there. That like a bit more investment would be good to put behind that kind of work. And maybe that's enough from me on media literacy.
Heidi, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, sure. I think on media literacy, when you look at it broadly, yes, absolutely, there's quite a big difference in between how well countries are actually, or I should say, certain groups of society, how well prepared they are and what sort of skills they have. I think what is interesting, though, if we go back to the first question about trust, because I mean, media literacy to a certain extent, is about not immediately trusting what you read, right? So there's like a need to clarify what is that healthy skepticism and what should one do with that healthy skepticism. I think, so we've invested a lot in different media education, media literacy projects around Europe at European level. There's the European Digital Media Observatory and the work that they are doing. We've also run projects here in Finland and other countries. And I think generally we see that there's a lot of focus on schools, a lot of focus on young people. But frankly, I think they're pretty well equipped. They've grown up as digital natives and of course need to be taught the skills. But once you have it, you know, things we've learned as children tend to stick with us. Whereas I think we have more of a challenge with those who are not necessarily as well versed into these topics and not necessarily have the ability to spot potential disinformation and how to then fact check things appropriately. And there's definitely things that platforms can and should do better. We are currently doing some work, or a sister company of ours is doing work on improving the capacity to pre-bunk myths. So you know, if you're in an area in a city that is potentially dangerous, you're not gonna necessarily be helped a lot by somebody telling you afterwards. You just walk through an area where you could have been robbed. Whereas if somebody tells you in advance, you're entering an area where you might get robbed, so you know, be vigilant. Your capacity to detect potential threats is much better. So these are the kinds of things that we are looking at how to better integrate into different products. So we're talking about flagging information better that is not necessarily backed by necessary facts. Now, of course, needless to say, doing that at scale is immensely challenging, but we're definitely very interested in exploring those types of opportunities and then figuring out what to do with it. But I think it's worth also kind of reflecting backwards. I remember back in the days when I did my when I was at university, professors were very keen to say, do not use Wikipedia as a source. It is not credible. But today, Wikipedia is considered, just because of the scale of the information that it gathers and the people that go and check. Obviously, there has been problems also in relation to Ukraine, with Wikipedia entries being modified. But I think there we also need to keep in mind that media literacy and all of that, yes, we teach a certain set of skills. Always check your sources, always look at the other perspective, always make sure that you're not spreading information that you are not completely certain of. But then we need to update it as technology advances as well, and the products we use and the services we use develop.
Thank you. By the way, the audience has a chance to ask if somebody has comments or questions at this point. Please just wave your hand and we'll give you. There's one question. Yes, Riikka, you should, I think, come here and stand under the white paper. White paper, yes, so that the camera captures you.
Sorry about wanting to ask a question, but I'm curious about the YouTube recommendation algorithm, because there's been some warnings that there might be disinformation campaigns as we head towards the elections. So could you give some concrete examples? How have you tweaked the recommendation algorithm? Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, so this is a topic where YouTube has really made a lot of progress. Just to give you the full picture of what we're doing in terms of content moderation, because I think it's important to look at it holistically. In our work on information quality across our services, we basically have 4 levers. So we want to raise up authoritative information, high quality information. We want to reduce the spread of borderline content. We want to make sure that we reward that those, for example, on YouTube that are able to monetize their content, so have ads and get the ad revenue for them for that content, that they meet the bar of quality as well. And the fourth R is raise, reduce, reward, remove, of course, remove. And then we remove content that goes against, of course, content that is illegal, but then we also have a host of community guidelines, especially for YouTube, but any other service as well, there's rules, there's policies that apply to those. And those, in the case of YouTube, for example, those community guidelines, I mean, they go way beyond what is only deemed illegal, because it's content. YouTube is a community. We don't, for example, we do not allow content that contains bullying and harassment, and that's obviously the kind of thing that is difficult to deem illegal unless it comes with a court decision. But that's just to give you the full context. So the recommendations, admittedly, was a problem years ago. Since 2009, what has been done is that the whole approach has been revamped, and what we have now in place is a very efficient machine learning model that we trained with hundreds of hours of video to teach it to distinguish, to be able to identify this type of borderline content, and with a view to specifically reducing the spread of it. And there, the whole idea is you should not be by mistake faced with content that you're not actively seeking if it is borderline. Now you might ask, okay, so what is borderline? It's gray area content. It's content, it's conspiracy theories. They're not forbidden by law, but some conspiracy theories definitely can be harmful. So we don't want to expose people to that unless it's, of course, their specified aim. They know a certain channel and they want to go and definitely have a look at out of interest, out of curiosity, what that conspiracy theory is based on. So this we took into use in 2019, and we saw the watch time in borderline content reduced by 70%. And that has been more or less the same experience across markets. I think it was last year or the year before, we introduced a new metric, which is called the violative view rate. So we wanted to get an understanding of how much watch time is there on content that is deemed borderline. So we take a sample of videos that have been watched and look at whether those meet the bar or not. The latest violative view rate is 0.09 0.11%. So out of 10,000 videos, it's only 9 videos that would contain something borderline. So and our machine learning model detects 70% of the content that is then potentially of the content that is removed. So we have really made a lot of progress, but I think it's important to validate our progress also by means of independent researchers, and that is happening all the time. We this summer introduced a new program for researchers to get more data from us as well. So this is the kind of things that we want to make sure that we do better in the future. But it's definitely, having said all of this, it continues to be a challenge for sure. But we do recognize the role recommendations play, and we do want to contribute to a good experience on YouTube. People often think that the recommendations and the algorithms are like super smart and they know what you feel and things, but they're pretty. A lot of it is based on, what have other people that watch this video, what have they watched, where are you based, what's your age. It's not necessarily very, very sophisticated after all, and we publish all the information on the parameters as well on the YouTube blog and as we update it and so forth. So there is information available out there.
And here, Jan has a question. Please step on the white paper.
Love it how there's like a hotspot.
Janne Rola. My question is about other languages than English. Since Russia Today RT is functioning in 30 different languages, it has been publishing all sorts of Russia propaganda since 2005. And for instance, the Russia Today RT Facebook group for Spanish languages has 18 million followers. It's told that it's one of the reasons why the global south has been such at least neutral towards the Ukrainian war because of this influence of these propaganda channels. Any ideas on how to tackle the other languages than just English-speaking propaganda or Moscow? Not just Google, or the others as well.
Yeah, maybe one point. Sometimes we think about in the West that the internet, what we following, it's the same in the global, but it's not. We know what's happening in India, China, South America or Africa. They have a little bit different kind of structure of the internet and the control, and of course dictatorship behind. So that's why if you try to influence this area, you have to know how they function, how they collect the information. And this is also the question to the Western media, that how much you invest to the different kind of countries and language background. Because in the long term, if we don't influence in this area, it might be turned around, because we are still quite minority amount of people who support the war together with the Ukraine against the Russian. And that's why this is big discussion to the tech companies and also the media houses, how much they invest to translate the news in this area. Because if you don't influence this area, there might be the situation that they don't understand our perspective to this conflict in the future.
Maybe to speak in more kind of concrete terms, Latvia, the country I'm coming from, is also representative of small language. And the way we tackle is, of course, through non-governmental fact-checking initiatives. I think this is the cornerstone and the start. We can't, like in general, government shouldn't be doing fact-checking and kind of having agencies that then publish fact checks and tell the public what to trust and what not to trust. So the best way for democracies is to really invest in the public activism, investing into teaching like real critical thinking skills. So building upon the idea of media literacy, it's not just being critical while thinking. And of course, this is how the idea of fact-checking and critical thinking gets exploited if it's done by agents with wrong motivations. Also, maybe to add a little bit of complexity there, the genre of fact-checking is now being exploited in the realm of disinformation. You know, one of the most popular Telegram channels in Russia are the War on Fakes, which is doing debunks on sometimes Ukrainian debunks or debunks about the truth that they kind of turn into debunk that is false at the end. That was to add to complexity, but for simplicity, investing in critical thinking globally.
I think in Finland, the fact-checking community is not very big. So we have maybe one NGO and then individual people, and I don't think our media outlets have full-time fact-checkers yet at all. What do you say, Anneli? Should we have more professionals working on this in Finland?
Well, I think somehow Finland is a little bit special case because the media houses have been so strong with their maintained audiences, and perhaps have been a little bit reluctant to cooperate with fact checkers like largely. I think broadcasting company YLE has at least like a consistent follow-ups on fact checks, and and so on, but not as a field of NGOs that would be constantly working. It's more focused on the period of elections or on media literacy trainings. So perhaps exactly in Finland, I don't think that now introducing new fact checkers would solve the problem for us. But in general, of course, it's what is problematic is also that, for example, Facebook works with their own trusted fact checkers. So if you don't, in your small country, in your small language area, have such a fact checker, then you will not get access to this whole flagging system of false or misleading Facebook posts. So in that sense, more widely investing in fact checking would make sense.
Did you, Kimmo, have a question? Yes.
Thank you. I am Kimmo from Ruud Pedersen. Some years ago, we had lots of debate in Finland about media ownership, but that has basically completely died. But when we look at the big picture, you have, on the other hand, old classic media, which is concentrating, and then you have the new media, which is on one hand concentrating, and on the other hand, you have lots of all kinds of undergrowth there. And, here in the north, we have the privilege of at least knowing the ownership on the classic media houses, which is not the case in every corner of the world. Any thoughts on this?
If I start, it's absolutely fact that the media landscape is fragmented. And for example, if we look at the Ukraine cases, the big media houses, they citate and they pick up the information in the social media. And sometimes there is not much time to for example, check the details. It's a typical, it's a quite fragmented. And also the new technological solution, when we come, for example, the deep fake, the audio and visual material in the future. This is also the challenge who own the data and how the people behave. They believe this kind of media. There's a little bit evidence and trend that we might be reduced to consume the text, and it's not anymore the question about the text. It's more the question about the next generation, that they consume more audiovisual material. And for example, we know in the South Korea that they're using the deep-faked news anchor, because they're polling the people and asking that, is there any problem in the 9 o'clock news that there is not physical people, but almost the same kind of people? The people answered, no, it's okay, because I'm doing something in my house. And we don't know exactly how the global audience will behave when they lose the trust to the audio and visual images. Shall we come back to the text? And this is also the question of the media landscape owners, what they own. The classical press, the text, and shall we try to train the people to treating the text and the content? Or is there more threat like deepfakes? But deepfakes, it's not only the bad thing, because Hollywood, entertainment, they're using all the time the deepfakes. And we don't know exactly how the people believe. They might start to believe that, okay, we don't trust anymore. We know that this information is shaped, but I don't care, because I can read it, or I can do that. And also the question, what kind of technological things, what is the media future, how it's look like, what they own, more the audiovisual things or the text, and how this landscape fragmented, not only the big media houses, social media, but also what kind of technological solution we will use in the future.
Yeah, so media ownership is, of course, one of the signals for any reader to evaluate what's the potential intent of the information that they are reading. Of course, if it's more kind of concentrated media ownership, there are more outlets. They have like easier opportunity to amplify each other's content and also game social media environment to basically, because less and less people are actually going to read news on particular news sites. Many people are using their mobile devices and get news from social media. And so, of course, if you have centralized ownership with many outlets and thus you have like more income from advertisement, you can invest more into these also social media campaigns and get noticed thanks to social media algorithms better. So in that sense, of course, like if the ownership is not transparent or if it changes not transparently, it's a worry because they become mainstream. Repetition and kind of the status quo, like media existed for a long time, nothing bad happened. Something happens behind the scenes and we don't have this red flag to be raised because this media earned trust. And it's up till the moment until someone kind of finds out that media actually exploited their privilege of being big, trustworthy, recognizable for their owner's interest, if it happens. So, of course, big influence comes also with big responsibility. And of course, for a regular media user, it creates challenges. At the same time, smaller media outlets, this alternative media realm, is what discredits the small players because their brands are probably harder to recognize, and the alternative media, which brands are popping up and down, think of say Breitbart News or Zero Hedge or other kind of alternative media outlets, they are perceived as small. Like we, the small guys, we are not in the same like big collaboration with the big media, and then they start to tell stories that they are part of the power elites' evil plans, and you can see how some conspiracy theories are developed. The real, like legit small guys are disadvantaged because they are discredited if they are not known, if they are perceived as fringy maybe by someone who is lazy to basically take a deeper look and see if they are really talking truth or not. If they haven't earned credibility, it's getting harder. So in a sense, it's bad news for democracy and for opportunity for new media outlets to emerge and earn trust on the same terms as the big established media outlets had given opportunity in the past.
Thank you. Yeah, in Finland, the media ownership is quite concentrated, but we haven't seen it as a major problem here yet, because things like in Poland or Hungary, where the state captures basically media outlets for its own political purposes, hasn't happened. And I think another big deal with ownership concentration or basically gatekeeping concentration has, of course, to do with the big tech like Facebook and others, how their algorithms actually function and how the news get out and where the advertising money goes. So that's another big deal. And I would like to get back to algorithm. You kind of ruined my point, Heidi, though, because you said that they're actually quite stupid, because I was thinking, oh, they read our minds and, they totally control us, but they actually don't. But how big deal are the algorithms, and what should we know? Like, if we talk about all the citizens, what should we know about algorithms? What do you say? Everyone can answer. Let's start from Anneli.
Well, I mean, I think well, Heidi just explained how this functions. I think, like a transparency around the policy behind the algorithm in simple words, understandable words, would be a great starting point, just so that it's, based on which principles you're fed certain information. But then I would also like to know what one additional thing based on algorithms and this trustworthiness of news media, a bit connected to this global south question. Because so news media where the ownership is known, like RT, BBC, Deutsche Welle, and EU has sanctioned RT, and social media platforms have done their own blockages or reducing the visibility of RT. But then in this elsewhere globally, do you treat RT and BBC equally, or see BBC more trustworthy, or EU comms most trustworthy than RT? Or is it like, I think these kind of things would be also good for the public to know.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to delve a bit deeper into the algorithms. Maybe first, just given that we're at a security conference, I think what needs to be also understood is when we speak about algorithmic transparency, we really need to keep in mind and understand that there's only a certain degree of information that should be disclosed, because, like you said earlier, all the ranking systems, if malicious actors have information on how those ranking systems are organized to the detail, yes, they can game those systems. And then we're in a world where it's even more difficult to assess the truth of different statements. So we need to keep in mind the security angle, and that's we have a system in place where few people realize, many people use Google on a daily basis, and the search engine in particular, and it produces results in a very short amount of time. You might notice every once in a while that there's changes in how results are shown to you. Some results give a so-called knowledge graph. Some results include a map. Some results have ads. And we do some 300,000, 400,000 experiments on search every single year, and around 5,000 changes to the search algorithm every year. That's a lot. With that, I think it's good to, with that in mind, it's good to also understand that it wouldn't be meaningful for anyone, for a company to kind of disclose the details of every single small change here and there. But to the question on how then algorithms are able to determine quality, it's a complex exercise that partly relies on historical information, how much different sites link to each other, and there we do have, at least when it comes to the countries where there is an established, trustworthy news media, when we look at especially breaking news events, the algorithms are tweaked so that we strive to really make sure that the results that are surfaced come from established, trustworthy news institutions. But it continues to be challenging, and it's not one because it's, like I said, I mean, it's the whole question of how do you define quality, and how do you then teach a computer, a machine learning model, to understand what is quality and what does a declining quality mean? How does that manifest itself, and how does that work? But when it comes to, in particular, the news sources that have been mentioned here, I mean, RT and the others, of course, we already took them down before the sanctions, and that was a big thing for Google search to de-index news sites, because search is a reflection of the entire web. We de-index results that are illegal, but it was really it was a big thing to really go and make that change. And I think it's really essential that we in democratic societies really think long and hard about these types of decisions, so that we do not end up in a situation where we expect algorithms, or where we give algorithms too much power as well because of political sentiment. We need to keep in mind that in democratic societies we have fundamental rights that are not always in balance with each other, but that's the job of the courts to decide what is illegal and what is not. It is not the job of algorithms.
Thank you. Mika, do you have anything to add?
Well, sure. I'm just thinking that, well, I believe that technology, big tech companies have made a good progress. Because before, and roughly, I usually draw this line of 2018 when Cambridge Analytica scandal erupted. Before it, we saw how RT, Sputnik, other malign media outlets, especially about these hot topics like 2016 president elections in the US, the results that trended, if you Google Trump, they were much more sketchy than now. Indeed, like if you are trying to understand, say, the explosion on Kerch Bridge in Crimea, like very outrageous news, you want to understand, did it really happen? Maybe someone has like misled everyone by repurposing photos, things like that. And then, of course, like when you Google, first results that you see are these big, well, Western media outlets that prove to be trustworthy for the majority. And I also believe in presumption of innocence, like innocent before guilty, and with like outlets like Sputnik, RT, Breitbart, others, we have caught them lying. So, well, in this sense, I think that the general idea and status quo is that it's better that Google now is pushing like mainstream, trustworthy, until proven otherwise, media outlets. And, well, I mean, if you think about Twitter, the way algorithm was gamed on Twitter was by creating bot armies. Back in the days, you could just write a script, prepare a list of automatically generated Twitter handles, and say, Twitter, please create 10,000 bots for me. And Twitter would do it in no time. And then you can just put these bots in sync, and they would retweet hashtag that you want to start trending. Say, I'm just inventing like vaccines are altering DNA, and then people are coming and seeing, oh, there's this new hashtag trending. Maybe I should look in and see, maybe vaccines really, of course they are not, full disclosure, vaccines are not changing DNA, maybe they do. But now it's very, very hard. It's not that bots are not existent on Twitter, and not all bots and robotized technology is bad per se, but you can't bulk create such accounts anymore, and you can't game the algorithm the way you could back in the day, when also they were more transparent, like all search engine optimization market is there, and it could be used for good and bad purposes. So I don't know, like this is very ongoing discussion. We will never reach ideal state when like there is no malign information, because frankly we also have right to be misguided if we want so. If we want to believe in lies, we have the whole kind of we can do that. And so I also want to reflect that like the progress is evident. Still many things should be done.
Yes, I think we have to start use the algorithm. This sounds a little bit science fiction, but if we think about the emails or social media, there was a lot of they beginning the question that this is not me, this is only the professional people. But when we look in the future, the tools, how to create the algorithm, the application, they democratize. So this is something like that. You cannot avoid this situation. It's coming to the home of a computer. So if you try to understand the algorithm, don't stand outside. Start to using or try to find the people who understand the algorithm and change your attitude. We have a same history in the information and news. When there was a radio became TV, there was a lot of conservative people. This is not to me. I only concentrate to books. And now we have the same situation. The algorithm is coming. There are more and more free information in the space, what we consume all the time. And somebody analyzed this information, like spelling at. So I can see that in the future there are more and more amateur home spelling at. And for example, the companies, they might be changed what kind of people they hire. They not take anymore the journalists. They have to take data science. They have to change the idea. Or the classical journalist has to educate by themselves to understand a little bit algorithm. This is not only the good thing, but this is something like trend. If we look at the technological innovation, they coming, and how you adapt. You have to start to learn this technique that you understand what is the behind, like Nika said, that you little bit understand what's ongoing, because otherwise you are out of the game. And everybody know that if you start reading in the morning, Google the articles. For example, I come to the academic side, so it's absolutely painful to start to read the articles in manual. It's not anymore this day. You have to use the algorithm, the data, that you something like cover this issue or phenomenon area, because otherwise you are out of the game.
Thank you. This was interesting, and of course, but I think we still need journalists just to create the trustworthy information. Then what happens with it onwards, I guess, is the issue. I wrote down an interesting sentence from you, Nika. You said we have a right to be misguided. So if we really want to, read, for instance, fake news or whatever, lies or fairy tales, we have a right to do so, interestingly. Of course, that's part of the democratic society. So I would like to get back to what Aki said about deepfakes. Now, we only have a few minutes, so we could go science fiction a bit. So you said that already in South Korea you have deepfake news anchors, right?
Yeah.
So is this something that's coming? And what's the role of deepfakes in the misinformation world or disinformation world? And is this something we should be more aware about? Will we be having, a fake New Year's speech of Sauli Niinistö? Just somebody else doing it for him? Is this realistic? What's the threat of the deepfakes and all these new technologies at the moment?
I think it's the question of trust. So because we are trust to trust to text. So, and we still trust that there is an online TV. For example, our president speak to us. But like we know already, the technological innovation, they can shape the face. That we know we are polling that there are audience who likes more that the president smiling. And at the same time, the real time, there's an audience that they like to see the president more serious. And it's already options to do. And we don't know because we are not asking the global population how they behave. Okay, they know that this is not anymore real. This is this is deep fake. But still, it might be something like that. I don't care. I know that there is a disinformation between the information, but I can still live with this situation. So I don't know, maybe Nika, you know more this topic.
Sure. Well, deepfakes are topic of discussion for at least 4 years, or even more. And I think we are alerted about the possibility of deepfakes fooling us. Of course, there have been instances when something looked super real, but these instances, this famous video when an actor is actually changing his appearance and using voice of Obama to deliver the false speech, and then he says, oh, it was actually not Obama, it was me, but see how I can just kind of puppet the digital version of Obama. And some other instances of people doing something that they never did or saying something that they never said and so on. But it's because it is done in a form of experiment, having resources and having access to these algorithms. What we are seeing most of the time in social media, in clickbait media environment are the so-called cheap fakes. When you have an app like FaceSwap or other apps that use similar technology, that makes it very easy to alter the appearance. but it's much harder to alter voice, so it sounds like really authentic. And also the movements of the altered face, which actually you don't need to have many photos or videos to train an algorithm to recreate the face. It's enough with one. Nevertheless, you can tell, like our human eye, the way we've trained ourselves to interact in physical world, and so on, we can still recognize robotic, synthetic person on digital space. But of course, with metaverse coming in, and we know that many big tech companies are investing into virtual reality spaces, this technology will only evolve. So you can scan your true body and put the virtual eye set and see the same scanned virtual body in, say, in Paris. Like you are meeting a person who is living, say, in Prague, but you decide your virtual avatars to meet in Paris. And maybe the experience of drinking a cup of tea or coffee in Paris will seem very genuine for you, and your brain will be tricked that it's actually you meeting your friend and not the avatar of your friend. So this is where technology is kind of currently seemingly driving us, which makes me think that the realistic look and feel of synthetic digital representations of us will be more trustworthy. It could be just a matter of time.
Just very briefly, I know we're almost out of time, but I think what is important to talk about is also, so when we speak about deepfakes, I agree there's been a lot of fuss about that, but so far little evidence as to it actually having a disinformation aspect yet, but more sort of in the entertainment world we've seen this. But I think that too, so for example, we have made a huge data set available with a view to helping different entities better detect deepfakes. So with progress in developing them, you also need to do progress on detecting deepfakes. And I think that's just another example. When we've been talking here, I just realized that more and more what we need is because there's different institutions here and there doing different parts of the puzzle, but actually if we would sort of pool our resources better and coordinate it better, I think we could really improve that, like the fact-checking capacity, the what is relevant media education capacity, and then the sort of technological advances and what do we need to get the good parts out of it and identify and deal with the bad parts. So I think there's a need for some sort of new institution to come in and kind of do this, because otherwise these challenges can easily become overwhelming. I think the time we're in at the moment, we hear all of these emerging threats and we hear different anecdotes and examples, and it becomes difficult to handle, also partly because we feel, hey, we need to do something about this, but as an individual you don't know what. So I think that's something that we should definitely think more about, like what sort of institutions could come in and better coordinate this work.
Yes, thank you. I think we're running out of time. So just to wrap it up, this session was about the role of journalism in countering hybrid threats and disinformation. And thinking about it, I'm not worried about journalism as a profession. It's truth business, it's democracy business. It has been there for hundreds of years and will be there. But what I think what we need more is dialogue and cooperation with big tech, with disinformation, misinformation experts, even with the grey guys, who knows. And thank you for being here today, and enjoy the rest of the day.